Hey folks, how's it going? Pleasure to be with you today. Um, I appreciate Brother Stan's intro. This is say a very interesting time that we are currently in. And right now in this country, we are starting to hear rhetoric tossed around that people wouldn't dare speak about openly. We're starting to hear rhetoric where people are suggesting that we should possibly take away people's freedom of choice, their rights, even their ability to speak a thought that is not a part of the approved narrative. And what we have to understand is that this is a very slippery slope, because when we begin down this path, it usually doesn't stop after one or two things. Before you know it, we have imperceptibly slidden into something that this country has stood against for a very long time since its inception, and that is totalitarianism and an eradication of God-given liberties. The problem is that you always have these people who believe that they're virtuous people. A lot of them may be politicians, they may be celebrities, they may be, CEOs of companies, and they believe that they're virtuous, and they start foundations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or the Clinton Foundation. They start all these foundations because they want to go about doing good for humanity. And because they're virtuous people, when they set out to do good for humanity, we should just allow them to simply have their way and do what they want to do because it's for the greater good. It's for the greater good. Now, there is a very famous psychologist and philosopher. His name is Alan Watts. And Alan Watts talked about virtue and something called the Inquisition. He said, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Did you hear that? Now, we're all familiar with that old maxim, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. But what does it really mean? Well, we're going to find out, because he really does a great job of breaking down the explanation. He says, because all the do-gooders in the world, whether they're doing good for others or doing it for themselves, are troublemakers. Did you hear that? He said all the do-gooders in the world, the virtuous people, the people going about doing good in the world for others or for themselves, they're actually troublemakers. Now, if you really think about it, Hitler didn't think he was evil. Hitler thought he was awesome. He thought he was going about doing what was for the greater good. Well, now time and common sense has allowed us to see that he was an absolute horrific monster, and the atrocities that were committed by his order are things that have not left the consciousness of humanity, even almost a century later. But Alan Watt, he goes on and he says, on the basis that these do-gooders of the world are actually troublemakers, on the basis of kindly let me help you or you'll drown, said the monkey, putting the fish safely up a tree. Right? Now, I want you to look at that analogy. It's very interesting. He said, a monkey says to a fish, kindly let me help you or you'll drown. Right? Now, where's the fish going to be happiest and healthiest? That's in the water. But the monkey, thinking that he's doing good, tells the fish, no, 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 I know what's best for you. So you let me help you or you're drowning. The fish is saying, hey, I'm fine right here in the water. And the monkey's saying, no, 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 I need to help you. And I'm going to put you up the tree. Now, if you put the fish up the tree, the fish is going to die. But the monkey is forcing the fish to do something against his will, that is not in his own best interest, simply because that's what's best for the monkey. But what's good for the goose is not always good for the gander. And what we have to realize is that the reason why we have a Bill of Rights that was attached to this Constitution, as a matter of fact, Thomas Jefferson refused to sign the Constitution until they had created a Bill of Rights. Those 10 amendments, those first 10 amendments, called the Bill of Rights, was created to ensure in very clear, unequivocal language that we as American citizens always had certain rights in this country. And one of those is the right to choose what is best for ourselves, right? Freedom of thought, freedom of religion, okay? Things like that. But sometimes people who claim to be virtuous do-gooders think that they know better, and they're going to force you to do something against your will because it's for the greater good, and eventually you'll understand. Isn't that what they say? And of course, if you don't go along with it, then you're just going to have to be dealt with. And we see this in other societies. One of those types of societies that we see are communist and socialist societies. For example, um, Hitler went about exterminating people who he thought were irredeemable. Mao Zedong in China killed, I believe, around 50 million people during the genocide of the Chinese Revolution, of the Communist Revolution. Um, and he did it because these were intellectuals, these were people who valued things like liberty, freedom, um, education, etc., and religion, and the ability to make their own choices. And Mao Zedong felt like, I know what's best for my society and for this world that I'm trying to create. And I want to do what's good, and you're standing in the way. And so, because you're standing in the way, you have to be exterminated. See, that's the logical step that we end the path that we travel when we start to think that we can go about forcing people to do things for the greater good that are against their will. And this is why the United States is characterized by freedom. Okay, but Alan Watts goes on and he says, what seems a good thing today or yesterday, like DDT, turns out tomorrow to have been a disaster. Now, my mother, I remember her telling me that when she was a little girl, um, that her mother, when she had caught lice, sprayed the head of her and her sister with DDT. Now, DDT is a bug repellent, a poison. um, I guess it would be like spraying Raid in your hair. Okay. Now it may kill the bugs, but it also is very unhealthy and very damaging and could cause all sorts of sicknesses and disease and things like that, cancer, etc. And we understand that now, so we would never do something as crazy as spray the head of a child who has lice with DDT. But in the early 1960s, that's exactly what was done because they were told that that was safe. And that's why Alan Watts says what seems a good thing today or yesterday, like DDT, turns out tomorrow to have been a disaster. What seemed in the moral and spiritual sphere like great virtues in times past are seen today as hideous evils. Let's take, for example, the Inquisition. In its own day among Catholics, the Holy Inquisition was regarded. So, for example, um, when the Inquisition happened back during the Middle Ages, they didn't think that they were doing something wrong. In their minds, heresy was a horrible, horrific thing. There is no greater scourge to mankind than heresy. Heresy can cause you to lose your eternal life. And so any means to combat heresy was okay. And eventually, some council of people decided that, hey, heresy is such a problem that maybe we need to take extreme measures. And so what they thought was, maybe we go about and start murdering people who are accused of heresy, because heresy is so bad, we're just going to have to root them out. As a matter of fact, it's probably better for them as well. And so they began a campaign of hunting down and rooting out and killing heretics. They tortured them in the most horrific ways. They were burned at the stake. They were beheaded. Um, they were they were murdered by the millions, tens of millions. In fact, conservative estimates put the amount of deaths that were attributed to the Inquisition at around 100 million souls. 100 million souls that were lost. Now, just to give you some context, in the United States of America, there's about 350 million people. So imagine if 1/3 of the United States of America was just gone. That's how many people were killed and murdered simply for having different beliefs, because in the minds of the Catholic Church during that time, heresy or having a different belief was that deadly. So, extreme measures to deal with the heretics was okay in their minds. He goes on, Alan Watt, he goes on and he says, as we today regard the practice of psychiatry, it's the same way the Catholics looked at the Holy Inquisition. He says, you see, you feel that in curing a person of cancer, almost anything is justified. The most complex operations, the most weird surgery, people suspended for days and days on end on the end of tubes with X-ray penetration burning, or people undergoing shock treatment, people locked in colorless, monotonous corridors of mental institutions. In all good faith, the Catholics knew that the Catholic Church knew that witchcraft and heresy were terrible things, often plagues imperiling people's souls forever and ever. So any means were justified to cure the people of heresy. And then he says, we don't change. We're doing the same thing today, but under different names. We can look back at those people and see how evil it was, but we can't see it in ourselves. So therefore, beware of virtue. Should think about what he said. He said that as human beings, we can look back at the inhumane, horrific deaths of people who simply dared to think outside of approved thought, who simply dared to believe a different narrative, who simply dared to to want to worship God according to the dictates of their own conscience. These people were murdered by the tens of millions, and the people who did that thought that they were doing the will of God. It's very funny because in the Bible, in the book of John, chapter 16, Jesus actually says this. He says in verse 1, he says, these things have I spoken unto you, that ye should not be offended. They shall put you out of the synagogues. Yea, the time cometh that whosoever killeth you will think that he doeth the service of God. And these things will they do unto you, because they have not known the Father nor me. So Jesus actually talked about this. Predicted, he actually predicted that there would come a time when people would seek to murder others and would think that they were doing the service of God. It's very interesting because it almost seems like he was trying to prepare Christians for such a time, because he talked about it on more than one occasion. He talked about it in Matthew chapter 10 when he said, blessed are ye um, when men shall revile you and persecute you and shall speak all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. Right? For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. And then he talked about it again in Matthew 24 when he said in verse 9, then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake, and then shall many be offended. Right? I mean, it's really interesting. We're living in those times right now. It's happening right now. What he talked about and what he was trying to prepare Christians for. We're living in that time. See, what Jesus knew and what Alan Watt talked about. You see, now Alan Watt died 47 years ago, and his words sound just as true and just as relevant today as they did almost 50 years ago. Jesus knew that there would come a time where moral panic would be created and certain people would be looked upon as what you call folk devils. Okay? Let me explain. Wikipedia says, and you can tell me if this sounds familiar to you. Type it in the chat or whatever. Let me know. And I welcome you to go look up any of this stuff for yourselves. A folk devil is a person or group of people who are portrayed in folklore or the media as outsiders and deviant, and who are blamed for crimes of other sort and other sorts of social problems. The pursuit of folk devils frequently intensifies into a mass movement that is called moral panic. When moral panic is in full swing, the folk devils are subject of loosely organized but pervasive campaigns of hostility through gossip and the spreading of urban legends. The mass media sometimes gets in on the act or attempts to create new folk devils in an effort to promote controversy. Sometimes the campaign against the folk devil influences a nation's politics and legislation. So here they're saying folk devils are people or a group of people that are portrayed as a problem. They're outsiders, they're deviant, they're doing something, they're committing crimes, they're creating some sort of social problems or some sort of health problems or whatever, and they need to be dealt with. And as people seek to go after quote unquote these folk devils, they create something called a moral panic to get the support, the popular support from the people for whatever they're going to do to them. So, for example, the Roman Catholic Church during the Middle Ages, when they said, hey, heresy is a problem, and heresy is such a problem that if we don't deal with it, not only could their souls be in peril, but your soul could be imperiled as you might become infected by the disease of heresy. So we need to go after these people and we need to exterminate them. And the people said, yes, go get them. Right? They're in full support of going and destroying heretics. That's why, how do you think an inquisition is able to last centuries and able to kill 100+ million people? It's only with popular support, right? So when these campaigns against folk devils are in full swing, the media jumps in on it, the politicians, and sometimes these campaigns are so successful that nations can change their politics and write legislation specifically to deal with these folk devils. We'll get back to that. But I want to talk a little bit more about this moral panic, okay? And we won't go too long today, but I want to talk a little bit about this moral panic because Nachum ben Yehuda, who was a professor emeritus of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem published this article in October of 2019. And what he says is, he says, moral panic refers to cultural and social institutions, and you tell me if this sounds familiar, where heightened and exaggerated attention is given to a moral issue. Well, I'm just going to throw something out there that I think might be analogous to this. So he says moral panic refers to a cultural or social situation where heightened and exaggerated attention is given to a moral issue. So we think of, COVID-19 as a health issue, but it's become a moral issue now, right? And people are petrified by COVID-19. They're petrified of an illness that has a 99.98% recovery rate. Let me say that again. A 99.98% recovery rate. Did you hear that? Interestingly, when we talk about COVID and when we hear about it in the news, people never talk about, or at least I haven't heard people talk about, how many people have gotten COVID and survived. We only hear about how many people have gotten COVID and died. You see, it's the glass half full versus half empty. Life is about perspective. If we focus too much on how many people have gotten COVID and actually survived, like 99.98% of them, could it be that there won't be enough moral panic surrounding COVID to accomplish what certain people are trying to accomplish? Just a thought. It goes on and it says, um, exaggerated attention is given to a moral issue accompanied by inflated demands to activate and practice steps to control what is portrayed as the challenging and threatening danger to morality. The nature of the threatening challenge materializes characteristically with the emergence of increased anxiety and fear from the moral threat to the well being and future of a culture or part of it. Um, Down to earth representatives of such threats are epitomized as folk devils. And he goes along and he says moral panics are comprised of 5 basic building blocks, disproportionately in portraying or disproportionality in portraying the moral threat and the requested responses, concern about an issue, consensus regarding the threat, and hostility towards the folk devils. Did you hear that? So this is what moral panic does. Okay. And what I'm trying to explain is that today the moral panic is COVID-19 and the folk devils are the unvaccinated and the quote unquote anti-vaxxers. Now, I'm not saying that I'm for or against um, the COVID vaccinations. If you think that it is in your best interest and the best interest of your family to get it, then that is your choice. That is why the vaccine is there. But what I am against is forcing anybody to do anything that is against their beliefs and against their will. In fact, the Nuremberg Code that was developed after the Nuremberg trials specifically states in no uncertain terms that nobody should ever be forced to be a part of a medical experimentation or be forced to put anything in their body that they do not feel comfortable with. And the reason why was because that guy who thought he was Mr. Virtue, that is Adolf Hitler, thought it was totally okay to let a sick, deviant monster like Joseph Mengele do horrific experiments on innocent human beings. And so they put that into the Nuremberg Code so that that never happened again. But now, the moral panic over a disease that has a 99.98% recovery rate has been ratcheted up so much that people are pointing to the unvaccinated and the quote unquote anti-vaxxers as folk devils and telling them, you're the problem. It's funny because there's this article that I have here. It came out in the New York Post about a year ago, July 8th, 2020. And it says Governor Cuomo sent 6,300 COVID-19 patients to nursing homes during pandemic. This is a mainstream news article. It says that the New York is now home to one of the highest nursing home death tolls in the nation, with more than 6,400 deaths in homes and long-term care facilities tied to the virus. Governor Andrew Cuomo and his administration argue that the controversial policy is not to blame for the tragic figure. I'm sure. Of course. Here's another article. This is from a few months ago, March 1st, 2021, by Cassidy Morrison, and this is MSN.com. This isn't some conspiracy website. This isn't Dave's conspiracy blog. But so this is a mainstream news source, and the title of the article is 5 governors besides Cuomo who sent COVID-19 patients into nursing homes. And then it says, Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York is not the only state leader to have directed nursing homes to admit patients who have been hospitalized for COVID-19. Governors from Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer; California, Gavin Newsom; New Jersey, Pennsylvania, all enacted similar policies last year as fear grew that hospitals would be overwhelmed. So what do they always tell us? You need to get that shot and wear your mask because you're going to kill grandma. And yet these people actually put COVID positive patients into nursing homes. And what was the result? High death tolls in elderly care facilities. And actually, Cuomo's office, it was a leaked call with Cuomo's aide, Melissa DeRosa. It was discovered and confirmed that the administration had undercounted fatalities to preserve its reputation. So could it be that a higher death toll and more infected people was needed to create a moral panic over an illness that has a 99.98% recovery rate? Now you might be thinking that's irresponsible for you to say that. How dare you? You know, you shouldn't think things like that. That's not okay. But I'm going to read another article to you. This is in the Western Journal. It's written by Kip Jones for April 14th, 2021. And it says, let's make it higher. CNN director admits network weaponize COVID death toll. Bombshell Project Veritas report. So the mainstream media, he says, loves a high human death toll. Take it from CNN technical director Charlie Chester, who was reportedly catfished through a dating site, according to Mediate, and led unwittingly to disclose to the world that CNN's dark reporting tactics through the last year were allegedly rooted in the desire to see more dead people. The video, Charlie Chester admits that his employers engaged in pushing propaganda in order to achieve political ends. The video is compelling. In that video, the man, Charlie Chester, noted how far-left CNN relied on manipulation so it could tell the story that it wanted people to hear. Even if that story wasn't true, or if it was sensationalized to the point of spreading a message of hopelessness, leading viewers to conclusions rather than encouraging them to simply arm themselves with reliable information. Chester says this: listen to the way that CNN reporters ask questions, because they're not actually asking questions. Any reporter on CNN, what they're actually doing is they're telling the person what to say. It's always like leading them in a direction before they even open their mouths. The only people that will let on the air for the most part are the people that have a proven track record of taking the bait. The man admitted that he was also befuddled upon seeing CNN's gloomy COVID death tracker, that it didn't have more deaths to share with the network's audience. Maybe 50 million deaths would have offered a level of fullness for the bloodless, the writer, postulates. And COVID, according to Charlie Chester, COVID, gangbusters with ratings, right? Which is why we constantly have the death toll on the side, which I have a major problem with how we're tallying how many people die every day, because I've even looked at it and been like, oh, let's make it higher. Like, why isn't this high enough? You know, like today, like that would make our point better if the death toll was higher. So this is this man in his own words saying in no uncertain terms that they want the death toll higher because that would bring more ratings. Now tell me that's not sick, okay? He also surrendered that more deaths equal more fear. Fear drives ratings, so the networks needed more death. That being said, he caught himself rooting for Americans to die so that it would help the network's bottom line. Charlie Chester says, it's fear. Fear really drives the numbers. Fear is the thing that keeps you turned in. So fear gets ratings. Fear creates moral panic. Fear makes people relinquish their freedoms for the sake of security, and fear makes people turn on others who don't go along with that or don't believe in that and view them as folk devils. And there are people in positions of leadership and authority, influential people in media that are saying things about unvaccinated people and quote unquote anti-vaxxers, like Gavin Newsom in California, who says unvaccinated people are like drunk drivers, or they're putting others at risk, or they're super spreaders, even though we just found out that people who are vaccinated are actually still spreading the disease. Who would have thought? See, this kind of charged rhetoric is by design. It's by design because they want to create ordo ab chaos, which is order out of chaos. It's the Hegelian dialectic. Rahm Emanuel, who was a former chief of staff for Barack Obama, said, you never let a good crisis go to waste, because during a crisis, you can do things that you would never be able to do otherwise. Here's a note that I found from somebody that I think exemplifies what we're talking about in terms of the moral panic and the anger towards the folk devils. This is a guy who's a PhD, and he posted this, and he said, been looking for an article to put my feelings into words. This is it. I'm beyond angry. I'm furious. Since mask mandates return where I live, I've been filled with wrath toward the unvaccinated. It makes me want them punished. I want them to suffer this time. I want them to stay home this time. Why the bleep am I wasting another year of my 20s to protect some uneducated, stubborn, childish, science denying morons? Tell me why. I've never been so angry in my entire life. And now, and I'm going to wrap up. I know we're running out of time, but now the rhetoric um, towards now that the public at large has turned on the folk devils, the rhetoric is ratcheting up. And you even have um, Dr. Peter Hotez, who is from the Baylor College. He's a professor in the Baylor College of Medicine. He's published a paper just a few days ago where he says, in no uncertain terms, that anybody who disagrees with people like Dr. Anthony Fauci or other scientists should be guilty of a hate crime. And you can go look this up for yourself. The name of the paper is Mounting Anti-Science Aggression in the United States. He says, we should look to expand protection mechanisms for scientists currently targeted by quote unquote far-right extremists in the United States. There was a bill introduced known as the Scientific Integrity Act of 2021 to protect U.S. government scientists from political interference, but this needs to be extended for scientists at private research universities and institutes. Still, another possibility is to extend federal hate crime protections. So if you disagree, if you speak out against any of these people, they want to make it a hate crime. You see, first they burn books and then they burn people because they think that they are right, and they're using argumentum ad verecundiam, which is argument from authority or an appeal to authority, that you should bow down to the white coats, and that what you think, your little opinions, your quote unquote research is garbage, and you should do exactly what they say. That, as a matter of fact, if you continue to speak out, you should be found guilty of a hate crime. That's where we're at. That's the point where we're at right now. And it's all because this fear has been ratcheted up. And now we have come to what is beginning to look more and more like a modern day inquisition. You know, they're talking about forcibly vaccinating people. They're seriously having this discussion in the United States of America, despite the Constitution, despite the Nuremberg Code. They're having this discussion because of the moral panic, right? This is where we're at. See, Alan Watt, he said that we look back on those people, the Nazis, the inquisitors, and we see how evil it was, but we can't see it in ourselves. So therefore, beware of virtuous people. So I just want to leave you with that. I hope that you can agree that our rights need to be protected as people, and that we need to recognize that freedom is important. And I hope that we can agree that we should protect other people's freedoms, even if we disagree with them, because one day somebody may be coming to your doorstep because you disagree with something that they feel is important. So that's all I have for today, and hopefully I'll be invited back to do a part 2, or maybe not. Depends. Anyway, take care, folks.